Hi everyone, we have made it. It's Poetry Shop 15. At last, we're at the end of the anthology here. I always think this is quite a sad poem to end on. I would have loved to have seen this anthology end with checking out history, but this is an incredibly thought-provoking poem. So let's remind ourselves of what Beatrice Garland has got to say. Kamikaze. Her father embarked at sunrise with a flask of water, a samurai sword in the cockpit, a shaven head full of powerful incantations, and enough fuel for a one-way journey into history. But halfway there, she thought, recounting it later to her children, he must have looked down at the little fishing boats strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea, and beneath them, arcing in swathes like a huge flag, waved first one way, then the other in a figure of eight, the dark shoals of fishes flashing silver as their bellies swiveled towards the sun, and remembered how he and his brothers waiting on the shore built cairns of pearl-grey pebbles to see whose withstood longest the turbulent inrush of breakers, bringing their father's boat safe. Yes, grandfather's boat, safe to the shore, salt-sodden awash with cloud-marked mackerel, black crabs, feathery prawns, the loose silver of whitebait, and once a tuna, the dark prince, muscular, dangerous. And though he came back, my mother never spoke again in his presence, nor did she meet his eyes. And the neighbours too, they treated him as though he no longer existed. Only we children still chattered and laughed, till gradually we too learned to be silent, to live as though he had never returned, that this was no longer the father we loved. And sometimes, she said, he must have wondered which was the better way to die. Oh, so then let's think about the real meanings of this poem, and it's set around the events of a kamikaze pilot who flies to war and then decides to turn back before it's too late. Now remember, a kamikaze pilot, it was their job towards the end of World War II to fly their aircraft and deliberately crash them into American warships. So effectively, they were on suicide missions, and their sacrifice was seen as so honourable that it really fulfilled their obligations to the flag. And so it was something that families would talk of with pride. And remember that the Japanese culture is very different perhaps to our own. There is a great deal of tradition through honour, and when you bring dishonour to your family, you are almost forced to live, or certainly in this case of this kamikaze pilot who didn't complete his mission, you are forced to live a living death. You are not spoken to again. It is almost like you have died and you're haunting your family as a ghost because they no longer acknowledge your presence, which is a terrible thing. It is, as we say, a living death. And so, as we've mentioned, it's very embedded in Japanese culture, and we actually see this very interesting perspective shift in the poem. So there's a couple of perspectives that we get. The narrator, okay, and then the daughter of the pilot. So what we've got is the narrator explaining the events, who almost translate the story, and then the speaker gives us a first-person account of how the father, her father, was excluded. So at the end, the poet is questioning which death would have been better. To die as the kamikaze pilot, so stories for generations would have been covered with positivity, or would it be to grow old with a family who pretend that you're dead anyway? That's a very, very interesting debate, isn't it? And I think you need to take a moment really to think about what you would prefer to spend your existence doing. Now, there's several things that you need to understand about a kamikaze soldier, and I'm sure that all of your teachers have taught you these. And you do need to think about loyalty being your obligation, being proper. You've got to think about your militaristic duties, and also have a high regard for what is life. And the kamikaze soldiers also needed to lead simple lives. So those things are very important. I'm going to go through this quite quickly, all right, because the poem is very dense, and being the last one, I'm pretty sure your teachers have gone through this in quite a bit of detail with you anyway. So I'm going to pick out a few salient points for both language and structure. You'll be able to find lots of things that I say here onto the poetry postcards, which will become available to students later on in year 11. And there's certain things that I'm going to pick out right now. And I want to pick out some of the symbolic language that's being used, because here we see the reference to the figure of 8. Now, I want you to think about how that looks. Okay, so there's a flag waving the figure of 8 perhaps, and other things that you could perhaps draw reference to there. I'm just trying to find the reference in the poem. What we actually see, okay, is the little fishing boats strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea, and beneath them, arcing in sways like a huge flag, wave first one way and then the other, were the shoals of fishes. So we've got certain meaningful parallels that we can draw here. When you're waving a flag in the figure of 8, it's like an infinity symbol. And that's quite important, isn't it? So we're thinking about how infinity, that inseparability of life and death. So it could be this endless cycle of dilemma that the pilot seems to be trapped in. He's damned if he does it because he's going to die, and he's damned if he does not. And also, when you consider it as well, the fish are sort of like moving in like the movements of a flag. Could there be like a sense of surrender that comes through? Is he taking cues from the natural world that perhaps this is time to surrender? It's really important. I'm going to mention something about a turning point at the end of or the beginning of stanza 2 here. And we've got this sense that he's on a one-way journey into history, and then the Volta kicks in, but halfway there. Ooh, lovely, nice little turning point here. We've got this sense that the halfway point is significant, isn't it? Because we have learned in the first stanza that there's only enough fuel for this one-way journey. So if he's halfway there, this is the crucial moment, isn't it? He's thinking do or die. He's either got to go forwards or there's no turning back. So after this point, all right, he's taking in everything that he sees in the world around him, and perhaps he's realizing from the beauty of the natural world and all of the things there that it's just too precious to give up on. Or maybe he is looking for reasons to turn around. So that's something to think about. So the flag and the fishes acting like the infinity symbol could have some significance there. We've also got some brilliant imperatives or modal verbs in the poem too. Words like must, for example. We've got this sense of urgency that comes through, and there's lots of important decisions that need to be made. You imagine the pressure of that whilst you're in the cockpit of the plane. Huge pressure. The intensity of that is quite terrifying. We have got this deep-rooted sense of duty. And again, this links back to cultural expectation, doesn't it? And so where we've got the words must, when you look at the Kamikaze soldier's oath, you've got the word must in there. It's like this indoctrination, this brainwashing that a kamikaze pilot must experience. It must take some serious brainwashing to be able to consider getting into a plane and flying it into an aircraft carrier or similar. It's really terrifying, actually. What we actually see is this lack of punctuation, and this really helps to give this childlike voice weight. We see this lack of punctuation coming through, and it's quite important because it's like, I've got to tell this story. This story is coming out. We do see that very much throughout. There's lots of contrasting language choices within this poem, and they symbolise the contrasting and conflicting emotions of the pilot, which is only natural. We've got to see that. On the one hand, it's duty, and on the other is survival. So there's a section which demonstrates the beauty of nature. We've got the green-blue translucent sea. We have got the lovely fricative sounds as well, the alliterative sounds, the fishes flashing silver. And we've got this celebration of nature, this beauty of the living world. And then it's contrasted with these images of death, the samurai sword. We've got one-way journey, and then we've got a lovely word, turbulent. Of course, this could be referring to a plane. We've all been on those aircraft journeys where we've experienced turbulence. It's not very nice. But at the same time, it could be reflective of those internal thoughts. So this sense of turbulence coming through. So do consider that. I really like that idea of this poor guy having this inner battle with himself. What we've got at the beginning of the poem is we've also got this lovely use of listing, and this is perhaps evidence that the pilot is ready at this point of the journey. So at takeoff, we see the listing used to show his emotional detachment, that's going to help him to follow through his orders. And so it shows what he's got with him: flask of water, samurai sword, shaven head, full of powerful incantations. Right, just to mention that the samurai sword would have been in the cockpit with him, okay, because if he didn't die upon impact, he would have to kill himself, because it would not have been honourable to die at the hands of the enemy. So he would have to commit suicide one way or another, okay? So really do think about that. There's loads and loads of things that refer to honour as well in there, so it will be your job to look through that. For anyone who has missed this poem, I do think it's going to be quite important, because certainly for my set, it was only about, I would say, 3/4 of the class that have done this during lockdown. I will make sure that we do some kind of after school virtual session upon our return, where we can go through this poem in lots of detail, so that you can feel really confident with it. Because remember, this is only 15 minutes of journey time into the poem, so it doesn't give me the chance to really get stuck into it with you. I want to reinforce this idea of the sounds that come through in the poem, and I do want to talk about the softness of the sounds. We've got just this simple alliteration, so remember, you all know what alliteration is, whatever set you're in. If you're in a higher set and you do want to fancy out and crack out the old subject terminology, we've got the sibilant S sound, the fricative F sound, as I've already mentioned. And we can think about, when discussing nature, this could really suggest the narrator's recognition that such natural beauty may have discouraged him from completing his mission. Because what you need to think about is how the natural world, and we see it through the romantic poems certainly, the little views that we see often act as triggers to things in our imagination. So, you know, they spark off things. They can spark off massive emotions within us. And certainly for this samurai pilot, not the samurai pilot, you know what I mean, kamikaze pilot, we see that really he is transported back into the childhood memories of his past. So they act as triggers to give him these flashbacks into his memory. And again, we show the importance of the past, the power of the past, the power of memories to really make us rethink our actions and to bring us to our senses, certainly in this case. You'll notice how the poem changes into italics at various points in the poem, and we see that in the last couple of stanzas of the poem, and this indicates a change of speaker. And this is really giving us a sense that the story is being passed down to her own children, and the narrator in the earlier sections of the poem is kind of explaining the process. The final couplet in this poem really does hit home the key themes of what are trying to be passed over to us here. And it's very dramatic, and in very somber tones. It doesn't really offer opinion, but it certainly challenges us as readers to come to our own decision about whether death or a living death was a better fate for him. We do have a very nostalgic tone, just created through the regular syllable patterns here, but we have also got this sense of a very lilting rhythm, okay? And this almost reminds me, I don't know if I'm just being a little bit flouncy and fancy at this point, of the sort of movement of waves, the sort of the view that the pilot would have had looking down. It gives us a sensory immersion in not just what he sees, but perhaps also what you would hear, either the humming, the thrumming of the engines of the plane, or indeed, if we were out of the plane and in the memories, the lilting of the waves. What we've also got, one more thing that's just worth a quick mention, is the use of asides. And we've got this really calm, natural language. And this juxtaposes itself with the horror of the action of what a kamikaze pilot does. And it helps to really give us a more comprehensive understanding of the gravity of that role that these men were asked to undertake. So that's 15 minutes gone already, and I haven't even scratched the surface there. So I do hope that you can combine the few little glimmers of knowledge that I've given you here with all of the information that you can obtain from your own teachers and also from your own imaginations. Please trust yourselves, folks. Poetry is not the enemy. You need to take it and run with it. Remember that the emotions that poets talk about here are emotions that all of you are capable of experiencing. Providing that you write about these things competently, you answer the question that's being asked of you, and that you're aware of what the assessment objectives are asking of you, you've just got it in the bag. You really do need to trust yourself. So I'm going to wish you luck. You know where we are. Do ask us anything that you're unsure about, and there'll be lots and lots of virtual revision sessions to help you with this closer to the time in 2021. So I'll speak to you very soon, and do take care. Bye everybody.